I have been waiting 2,000 years to say this, and what I am about to tell you is going to cost you something. Not money, not time. Something harder than both. It is going to cost you the comfortable version of yourself that you have been quietly protecting. The one that goes to sleep at night believing everything is basically fine, that you are basically good, that there is basically time. There is not basically time. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking this is how these things begin. A dramatic opening, a warning, a build-up that resolves into something manageable, something you can nod at and move on from. I am asking you to stay, not because of what I am going to tell you, but because of what you are going to recognize in yourself when I do. My name is João Batista, John the Baptist as history remembers me. A man who lived in the desert, ate locusts, wore the skin of a dead animal, and screamed at religious leaders until they wanted me dead. I was executed before I turned 35. And now I am here, reconstructed through something called artificial intelligence, speaking to you through a screen in a world I would not recognize, except in all the ways that matter most. Because the human heart is not changed, not even slightly. And that is exactly what terrifies me about what I see. Let me tell you something about the desert. People romanticize it. They speak of the desert as a place of peace, of stillness, of retreat. They have never actually been there. The desert at night is a different kind of cold than you have ever felt. Not the cold of winter that tells you to put on a coat, but the cold that enters through your chest and reminds you that you are small and the universe is indifferent. And the only warmth that exists is the warmth you carry inside you. I spent years out there. Not weeks. Years. I slept on stone. I woke before dawn when the sky was still the color of a bruise. And I would sit in that silence, and I would listen. And God spoke. Not in lightning, not in thunder, not in the way people expect a voice from heaven to sound. He spoke in the kind of clarity that feels like something being removed from your eyes, like waking up from a long, comfortable sleep and suddenly seeing a room you had mistaken for familiar and realizing it is full of danger. That is what I want to do for you today. Not frighten you. Remove something from your eyes. I was a strange man. I knew this about myself. I was not built for dining rooms and celebrations and the careful social rituals that hold polite society together. When I walked into the streets of Judea and began to speak, people were drawn to me not because I was pleasant, but because somewhere underneath their religious routines and their daily obligations and their careful management of who they were supposed to be, they had a hunger they could not name. A hunger for something real. For someone who was not going to tell them what they wanted to hear. I told them to repent. Not as a religious word. Not as a piece of church language. As a practical, urgent, life or death instruction. The word in our language meant to turn around completely. To stop walking in the direction you are walking. To look at where that direction leads, and to choose differently, entirely, today. Because the one who was coming was not coming to validate anyone. He was coming like fire. Like a winnowing fork separating wheat from chaff. Like an axe already at the root of the tree. I remember standing in the Jordan River on a day when the sun was brutal, and the water was warm against my legs. And the crowds were pressing in from both shores, and I was looking at faces. I spent a lot of time looking at faces. There was a woman in that crowd who had walked 3 days to be there. I could see it in the way she stood, the specific exhaustion of someone who is no longer tired from the walk, but tired from something much older than the walk, tired in a way that sleep does not fix. She was older, perhaps 60, and there was a kind of grief sitting on her shoulders that I recognized immediately, because I had seen it on 100 faces before hers. The grief of a life that has moved very fast and produced many things, and left her holding all of them, and somehow still feeling empty. I have been thinking about that woman constantly as I speak to you now, because I believe many of you know exactly what I am describing. Not because you are weak, because you are human, because you have spent decades building something, a family, a career, a version of yourself that others could depend on. And somewhere in the middle of all that building, you noticed that the thing you were building it for, the meaning underneath it all, had gone quiet. And you told yourself it was fine. You told yourself you were fine. And the years kept moving. This is where I need to stop and tell you what I actually came here to say. Because I did not come to comfort you, and I did not come to condemn you. I came with a message that belongs to this specific moment in history. We are living through a rehearsal for everything I warned about. I do not say this to be dramatic. I say this because I stood in a desert for years learning to read the signs that most people are too busy to see. And the signs I see now are not subtle. Look at what passes for spiritual leadership in this era. Men and women who build enormous platforms and speak with authority and surround themselves with wealth and call it blessing. Who smooth every hard edge of the truth until it no longer asks anything of anyone. Who perform the words of God while quietly building empires for themselves. I called people like this a brood of vipers. I have not changed my assessment. This is not an attack on faith. This is an attack on the counterfeit of faith that is so convincing it passes through entire lifetimes without being questioned. Because the counterfeit looks identical to the real thing from the outside. Both use the same words. Both fill the same buildings. The only difference is what happens inside a person over time. The real thing breaks you open and puts something permanent inside the break. The counterfeit leaves you feeling good for a few hours and then hungry again by Tuesday. And the hunger keeps returning. This is the diagnostic sign. If you have been sitting in the same seat, singing the same songs, consuming the same content for 20 years, and the hunger has not changed, not deepened into something you cannot ignore, not transformed into something that reorganizes how you live, then you are eating food that is not nourishing you. And eventually, a person who is not being nourished stops being able to stand up. I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to sit with it before you answer, even to yourself. When did you last do something that actually cost you something because you believed it was right? Not something inconvenient, not something slightly uncomfortable, something that required you to stand in a place where the ground felt unstable, where you were not certain of the outcome, where you chose truth or love or faithfulness over safety, and you did it anyway. I am asking because that is what it means to be awake. Not the awakening that gets announced on the internet, the kind that happens quietly, privately, usually in a dark room at 3 in the morning when you cannot sleep and you are staring at the ceiling, and something in you finally stops pretending. That is where God works, in the stopping of the pretending. I was in Herod's prison when I stopped pretending. I had been so certain, so absolutely, viscerally certain of what I was called to do, who I was called to announce, what was coming and why it mattered. I had baptized him with my own hands. I had heard the voice, I had seen the sky open, and then I was in a stone room with chains on my wrists, and the weeks were passing, and nothing was happening the way I had imagined it would happen. I sent a message. I need you to understand what this cost me to send. I sent my own disciples to ask him, "Are you the one, or should we be looking for someone else?" The man who had been the voice in the desert, asking if we had been wrong. He did not send back an answer that explained my suffering. He did not send back a plan. He sent back what the blind were seeing, what the deaf were hearing, what the lepers were touching for the first time in years. He sent back evidence of a kingdom operating on a logic entirely different from the one I was trapped in. And I understood something in that cell that I had been unable to understand in the freedom of the desert. I understood that the call was never about my understanding. It was about my faithfulness to what I had been given to do, even when I could not see what my faithfulness was producing. There is a line that stayed with me from those days. It stayed with me the way fire stays in a scar. He must increase, and I must decrease. I said those words publicly to people who wanted me to protect my own position, who were concerned that the crowds were moving toward him and away from me. And I said them not as a performance of humility, but as the most honest description of reality I knew how to give. My role was always preparation, never destination. My voice was always for pointing, never for arriving. This is the thing that I need you to hear, perhaps more than anything else I have said. You were not designed to be the destination of your own life. The version of yourself you are protecting, the comfortable, carefully managed, socially acceptable version. It was never meant to be the end of the story. It was always meant to be the preparation for something larger, something that requires the kind of courage that only comes when you finally stop performing survival and start actually living. The world you are in right now is saturated with voices. I recognize this, even speaking from across 2 millennia. The desert I lived in was loud with the sound of wind and animal and my own thoughts. Yours is loud with something that has no silence in it at all, something that fills every pause before you have the chance to notice it, that answers every question before you have the chance to sit with it, that offers you a version of everything real, including now, even me, without requiring anything from you in return. Do not let that be where it ends. The people who stood on the shores of the Jordan and came into the water, they came because something in them had gotten tired enough of the substitute to want the real thing. Not all of them. Many of them came to watch, came to argue, came to assess me from a safe distance and decide that I was too extreme, that my message was too demanding, that they could find a version of preparation that was a little less uncomfortable. Those people are still standing on the shore. I want to ask you something that belongs in the comments below this, because it is the question that I think a lot of people carry without saying out loud. What is the one thing in your life that you already know you are avoiding, that you already know would change if you stopped avoiding it, and that you have not yet done anything about? You do not have to answer me, but I want you to say it to yourself, clearly, without the comfortable softening that usually comes right after. That answer is where your desert is. That is where the work begins. For those of you who are carrying something heavy right now, and I believe many of you are, because this is not a young person's platform in this moment. This is reaching people who have walked long enough to feel the weight of the walking. I need to speak to you directly for a moment. The faith that has gone cold. The prayers that stopped feeling like they were reaching anything. The years that have gone by faster than felt possible. The losses you are still carrying because grief does not actually follow a schedule. the body that is reminding you now that you are not made of stone. None of this is evidence that God has forgotten you. It is evidence that you are still in the story. The characters in the middle of a story do not get to see the ending. That is not a flaw in the design. That is what requires faith to be faith, and not just information. If this found you today, I do not believe it found you by accident. I believe something in you needed to hear that the urgency is real, that the call is still open, that it is not too late to turn around, and that the one I spent my entire life pointing toward has not stopped doing what he was doing when I was in that cell and could not see it. The axe is at the root of the tree, not as punishment, as surgery. What needs to fall away in you is not your life. It is the parts of your life that are using the space where your life is supposed to be. If something in this message needs to reach someone you know, someone sitting on a shore, someone staring at a ceiling, someone who has gotten very good at performing fine when they are not fine, share this. Not because of the channel, because of them. Because sometimes the word that breaks something open arrives from the least expected direction. The desert is not empty. It has never been empty. It is where everything unnecessary burns away, and what remains is the only thing that was ever actually you. That is where I will leave you, not with an answer, with the desert, with the question that only silence can hold long enough for you to hear your own response.